Prologue. He hadn't grown up knowing he would murder another person, let alone several, but he had. Hadn't everybody considered doing it? Only he had actually done it, and now it was all that consumed him. The small voice in his head grew louder with every passing day, soothing his worries and prodding him forwards. It wasn't as grisly as the movies made out. There was blood, of course, but it hadn't been the stomach-curdling event that he thought it would be. Blind rage would do that for you. Or maybe he was just different, unaffected. Thinking back to the moment when it first came down to it, he knew it was meant to be. He understood that as he took in the artistry of his creation. But it wasn't quite right. He was still working on that part. Funny how it had just come to him like that. Just a flicker of a memory, and he had the perfect accessory. It was 9:04 a.m. when it happened. He knew that because he had looked at his watch just seconds before she had started. He just wanted to read the newspaper, but her voice, shrieking across the room like a drunken banshee, had grated on him. It went through him like nails down a chalkboard. He cocked his head and right then, in that precise moment, he knew he would kill her. He knew it like he knew the sky was blue and the grass was green. It was that simple. In the background, he could hear the faint echoes of Whitney Houston's song playing on the radio. Remnants of snow lingered outside through the cracked window pane. Winter had come late this year. He felt the hard wooden floor beneath his feet, threadbare carpets doing little to cushion his steps. When he looked at her again, it wasn't her face that gawped back at him, reminding him why it was that she preferred his absence. She had friends coming over. She didn't want him hanging around tonight. The same excuses. It used to be because he was too young. Now it was because he was too old. He moved with such speed that she didn't even register the change in him. Too busy with her own selfish need to enjoy the pleasures in life to be concerned with him, and that was when he knew why he would kill her. Because she reminded him of her. His mother. His fist was first to react. A direct hit between the eyes, smashing the bridge of her nose in a bone-crunching blow. She staggered, but the bitch held firm, numb from the booze and drugs that consumed her. Her expression at first was quizzical when he grabbed her by the throat. As he began to squeeze, then she knew. He saw the fear within her, her eyes bulging, his grip tightening. "It's all your fault," he hissed, spittle bathing her face as he pulled her closer to him. "You and your filthy, vile, disgusting lifestyle." His grip loosened a little. He would take his time. Anger was pushing him onwards. But hate would make this worthwhile. Without you and him, he snarled at the thought of his father, without you both, she would still be here. "Please, baby, don't. Come on, I'll do anything." Her voice was scratchy as she gasped for every breath, to no avail. He remembered pleading similarly as a child, not to be sent away, to no avail either. "Anything you want," she tugged at her top, showing him her tits. He liked her tits. He let go of her throat, then, and for a second she thought maybe it would be okay. Until he slapped her, his palm against her cheek. "You made her do it." His fingers wrapped around her scrawny neck once more. She had no idea what he was talking about as she clawed at his arms. His face contoured with a mix of rage and sadness, his eyes brimming with tears. "Because of you. She did it," he half whispered, half sobbed, as his fingers gripped tighter. The blackness came for her, as she knew it would. Her entire life she had lived with the blackness, the dark side of existence engulfing her before she had even a chance at life. She had never thought it would come from someone like him, though. He had adored her, fucked her because he wanted to, not because he was paying, though there were times he had paid for something more special. There were many times under a man that she considered how her life would end. While they paid to thrust into her, she would take her mind elsewhere. Her thoughts would start off light, the idea of escaping it all, the addictions and the lifestyle that came with them. But eventually, her thoughts would move towards the end. Her death would be lonely, forgotten easily. Afterwards, when he was finished with her, when she was displayed just the way he wanted her, he set about finishing the work. The doll would be a reminder when they eventually found her. Chapter 1. Dark grey clouds comforted the sky on a harsh November night. The moonlight was barely visible. It had rained earlier, and the grass was now sodden and waterlogged in places, the beginnings of a frost. With the weather as bad as it had been lately, this area should have been desolate, nothing more than the tiny creatures that lived among the bramble and trees. Not like now with the noisy generator that was working the overhead lamps. The bright white forensic tent that was hurriedly erected the minute CSM got here stood out like a sore thumb. Onlookers gawped from beneath umbrellas and raincoats at the macabre scene now hidden from them. Home Office pathologist Dr. Tristan Barnyard was virtually unrecognisable in his all-in-one white forensic jumpsuit. In amongst his team of scientific evidence collectors, they looked like pins in a bowling alley that had been scattered. Some were laying prostrate on the floor, examining God knows what in the fingertip searches. Others were standing around, talking in quiet voices, filling in forms, and waiting for further instruction. Detective Inspector Sophie Whitton stood silently on the periphery, watching like a hawk. Her tall and wiry frame stood stoic as she glanced around the cordoned-off area. It was how she always surveyed the scene, standing back from it, taking it all in. Inquisitive eyes looked out from under a mop of black hair that hung longer at the front than the back. She swept a hand through it and felt the damp hair slowly soaking in, before shoving her hands into her pockets. Hunching her shoulders against the cold, she blew a puff of hot air out. The basic questions. Why here? Is there something special about the place that links to the killer or the victim? How did he or she get the body here? Was the victim already dead and this is just at the body dump site? Or is this the execution site too? She went through everything in her head and drew her conclusions. Only later would she start to dissect them and focus on the areas that she could find answers for. After pulling on her own forensic booties to match, she followed the designated pathway that forensics had deemed clear to walk on without fucking up the crime scene, until she found herself at the doorway to the tent. Chief Inspector Adam Turner stood hunched over the body like an old man, taking a rest. House to house is taking place right now, he informed his detective. She nodded. She already knew that would be the case. It was standard practice. He turned to leave. I'll see you back at the station. Tristan was bent down on one knee, examining what Sophie knew to be the body of a young woman. There was nothing unusual in that. Women turned up dead on her patch as often as young men did. No, what was unusual was what had been done to this body. A dog walker had called it in, out for a late Sunday afternoon stroll with her spaniel, Daisy. Mrs. Florence Marchant had the unfortunate occasion to come across the partially decomposing corpse. She usually took an alternative route, but the pathway had been flooded, so they had taken a different path and ended up here. Estimation on time of death to be around 48 hours ago, Tristan's well-spoken voice said as he turned briefly to acknowledge the detective's presence. Asphyxia by manual strangulation would be my best guess right now. We're quite some way from full-on purification, but that's more likely to be the colder weather than the time that's holding it off. Let's all be thankful it isn't June. Slight bloating to the neck and abdomen, what's left of it anyway. He stood up, towering above everybody else. We've got animal interference, or a cannibal. He chuckled at his own little joke. Whitton didn't smile. Anyway, the incision site has attracted attention from the local habitat. He coughed and cleared his throat. The spleen is missing. Did he leave one? She asked the question, but wasn't sure she wanted the answer. It had been almost 3 months since the last, and 8 since the first. Knowing exactly what she was asking, Tristan shook his head. If he did, it wasn't found with the body this time. So it might not be him then. Her voice was unusually hopeful, until the doc shook his head slowly. The missing spleen could just be animal interference. No, it might not be, but it fits. She tilted her head and waited for the explanation. It would be highly unusual that an animal hit potluck and chewed the exact spot that the spleen can be found. Plus, there is additional post-mortem modification. But there is no doll this time, or at least we haven't found one. That's going to piss him off then, she said, her lips pressed together in a firm line, her jaw twitching in frustration. But if we're lucky, then this is it. His spree is done. We can always hope for that. The surrounding area is being scoured as we speak, I believe. If he left one, then the team will find it. He spoke quietly as he passed his clipboard to a colleague. His grey eyes softened as he waited for her next question. Do we have any ID yet? Her voice was quiet, and she waited while he pulled off his latex gloves with a snap and tossed them into the receptacle on the floor. No, not yet. But if she's in the system, then I should have it by morning. Otherwise, it's a case of dental records, and hoping that someone is missing her. Whitton moved closer to the body. She had seen plenty of corpses in her time. 15 years on the job, the last 4 in CID. It didn't faze her anymore. At least not when they were first found. When they were just a body, and didn't have a name or a family. The victim was young, mid-30s. Her hair had been blonde once, now just a muddied nest of tangles. She had been posed on her back in a macabre image of Sleeping Beauty. Her eyes had been removed, though. Decomposition was beginning to set in. Her clothes had been piled neatly next to her, blue jeans and a blue top with green trainers. It reminded Whitton of a bruise. Whoever she was had been redressed in pyjamas, light blue silk with beautiful ivory buttons that looked expensive, just like the others. She rubbed her hand over her face and grimaced. This is the third one, and we're still no closer to catching the bastard. She spoke with no malice. It wasn't the forensic team's fault. Every scrap of evidence there was to be had, they had found and processed. It just hadn't led anywhere. She wasn't ruling anything out at this stage, but this killer, or these killers, were smart. You know, eventually they will slip up, and when they, when they do, we'll catch them. I know. Doesn't bring any comfort to the family of this one, or the 2 before, though, does it? She was weary. 8 months, and all they had was a psychic evaluation to go on, some creepy dolls, and the fact he liked to dress them in pyjamas. She checked her watch. 9:30 p.m. I'm going to head back. I'll let you know, yes, soon as we have something. It was raining again now as she stepped outside of the tent. That fine drizzle that seemed to seep into your bones and freeze at your very core. The techs worked in relative silence, painstakingly logging every blade of grass that might hold even the minutest of clues. The tinny sound of her phone ringing broke the silence, and she made an urgent grab for it, pushing past the small collection of press all waiting for that confirmation so they could get the byline written before the night's deadline. Whitton. Soph, it's Dale. Her partner for this case sounded cold as his voice echoed through the airways. For a brief second she thought it might have been Yvonne, apologising for the way she had left things when Sophie had had to leave halfway through dinner, but she knew that wouldn't happen. Firstly, Yvonne didn't back down if she thought she was right, and secondly, she knew not to interrupt when Sophie was on a call-out like this. Dale's voice brought her back from her thoughts. We found it. Where? She began moving quickly down the path towards her car. Cooper's Field. He was walking too. She could tell by his breathing. She's blonde, right? Like the others. Doc's theory of the 3 wise monkeys looks more promising with this one's eyes, you know? Yeah. She yanked off the white forensic booties and balled them up, ready to throw in the bin provided. She stopped then to listen to him properly. The wind was picking up, and he sounded a little muffled as he cut the handset to speak. Laid out like the others? She tucked her phone between her ear and her shoulder as she lit up and took a drag on a cigarette. Yeah, on her back, redressed in silk pyjamas. Her hand subconsciously raked through her short dark hair. Dale sucked in a breath against her ear. So it's him then. Poor cow. He almost whispered. He was looking at the doll, knowing that whatever injury had been inflicted on it would be the same on the victim. Yeah, it's him. I'll meet you back at the station.